Hey guys, welcome back to Coliseum Forum. If you followed us earlier, we were interviewing Ed Brisson. Now we're back with Russ Manning award-winning comics artist Aaron Conley and his sidekick Bandit. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Just fine.
Just fine. How are you holding up with the quarantine?
I mean, to be honest, my life hasn't changed too much, really.
You know that's an interesting theme with the comic creators. A lot of the writers and stuff that we've talked to. Uh, I asked that question, and it's like, yeah, things really haven't changed much. I'm usually sequestered in an office for 12 hours a day, and that's sort of still what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I still get up and walk every morning, and I've been keeping my distance, but I mean, you know that we live in a small town, so I
Sure,
don't have to avoid that many people. You know,
fair, yeah.
I'm just walking around my block, and the biggest difference is my wife is home from school. From school. My wife's home from school.
Right,
My wife is working from home
right,
currently.
right.
Um, but yeah, besides that, nothing as much has really changed. I haven't seen any of my friends almost in like a month,
I
but
I saw you from
still working,
I saw you from
still
your
doing
front
stuff.
porch for
Randomly, work has come in,
right.
so
Yeah, like I said, I saw you from your front porch for 10 minutes last week. That was good.
yeah, right, exactly.
So I mean, at this point, you've worked for pretty much everybody. You had Saber-tooth Swordsman at Dark Horse. You did some work at Marvel, DC, Image with Scotty Young. I mean, is there a publisher you haven't worked for at this point?
We were just talking about I haven't done anything for Aftershock.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Joe Pruitt and Aftershock. We talked to him
Yep,
yesterday.
I emailed some people at Valiant about a year ago to ask them about if they wanted any cover work. I haven't done anything for them either.
So, speaking of cover work that you've done in the past, one of the things you and I were both big TMNT fans. And that's something we talked about with Ed Bryson. He did a crossover event with the X Files and the TMNT. If you could, and I know how you feel about mashups, but if you could kind of take two things you love and put them together in one story, what would you put together?
I always thought a Daredevil TMNT crossover would be perfect.
Yeah, no, that would
Like
be good, right?
I always want to do a Daredevil TMNT crossover that like they don't actually meet.
Oh, so
That
they're just
like
both running around New York City fighting the
yeah,
Foot,
that like they just happen to be like the Daredevil's like fighting the Hand on like one side of this like building in an alley,
right?
and the TMNT is like fighting the Foot on
Right.
like on the other side of this alley. And there's like scenes where they like almost meet, like Daredevil like steps on the manhole as they're like going
Going back
down.
in, yeah,
You
that
know,
would be awesome. Yeah.
I always thought that would be the perfect. I was like I understand that maybe it's a bit on the nose because the TMNT were like sort of like they took a lot of influence from Daredevil,
Sure.
but like why not team them up? Who cares?
No, that
It
would
would be
be,
awesome.
yeah, it would be really cool. No, I agree.
I mean, you could actually have them meet too, but I always thought it'd be cool to just have them not meet and like they're still like just doing different things.
no, yeah, I would definitely read that comic. So
Yeah.
you've worked with some really awesome creators. Damon Gentry when you guys did Sabretooth Swordsman. You worked with Aubrey Sitterson on GI Joe for a little bit. You worked with Scotty Young on Bully Wars. Are there any writers or anybody out there that you would love to work with at this point?
Alan Moore, of course.
Yeah, that
Like,
would, yeah.
if Alan Moore called me on the horn, I'd be like there in a second.
For
You
like
know,
any story, like anything.
anything, dude. If Alan Moore called me for anything, I would do that thing.
That thing,
I almost worked with Grant Morrison on a story for Heavy Metal magazine,
sure,
um, but I couldn't. They wanted like 10 pages in like over a weekend, and
right,
I was like, guys, I can't hit that deadline. I'm sorry.
right,
Like, and I'm not. I mean, working with Grant Morrison would have been awesome, but
sure,
I wasn't about to work with Grant Morrison for the first time and then flub a deadline. You
right,
know.
right.
Um,
So this is
who else would I like to work with? I don't know. I never really thought about that too much, honestly. I really like working with Damon because I'm not a writer,
sure.
but I feel like I have a lot of good ideas, as you can see from my Daredevil TMNT crossover.
There you go. Yeah,
And like I don't feel like I'm the best artist either. So I'm always trying to be a better artist, and I'm
right.
not really spending time like working on my writing skills.
Sure.
So it's nice to work with, and Aubrey's been a really great guy about that too. It's really great to work with a writer who you can be like, yo, I have all these ideas, and um, you take them. Here's a pile of ideas.
Right.
You take these and make sense out of this.
Right.
You know, and then good writers like Damon and Aubrey will like come back to me with all that stuff that I had like way fleshed out.
Right.
And then I make my little notes here and there, you know, or I'm like, I don't want to draw a bar scene.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they'll be like, oh yeah, well cool. And then they make their little fixes, and then we have a comic.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of guys in this industry that I can't do that with.
Sure.
You know? Jason Aaron. I mean, I'd love to work with Jason Aaron on something.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
We're both big Jin fans, so I've talked to him. I've just shot out to him that we should work. I haven't actually shot it out to him, but I thought about it. He's texted me about, I mean, he's tweeted me about Jin and stuff before.
Sure. Yeah.
So I've been thinking I should get Scotty to hook us up and we'll make a comic about Jin.
That would be cool. I mean, so just so everybody's aware, Aaron Conley is a Gin hound, I think is a nice way to put it. Gin and tonic extra lime, right?
Yeah.
So,
Gin and soda.
Gin and soda extra lime. That's right. Tastes just like a Sprite. So you mentioned working with Aubrey Sitterson, and how he can kind of untangle your ideas when you put that out. For anybody watching at home, we actually are going to do a Coliseum forum with him tomorrow at 3 p.m. just to plug that really quickly. But back to Aaron, what was sort of your, and I know this is something you and I have talked about outside of comics, but what was your origin story with comics? What was the first time you found a comic and you were like, wow, this is awesome. I need to be more involved with this.
When I was a kid, Walmart and Kmart used to carry. I don't know if Walmart was even around.
No, it was like Kmart, and I know Toys R Us did it too. Yeah.
There used to be this place in town called Zares.
Okay.
I think, but mainly Kmart. We would go to Kmart, but they used to carry these things that were like 3-packs.
Right.
And you could see like one cover, and you could see like another cover.
Right.
But you never knew like what was in the middle.
Yep.
I mean, those things became a huge part of my life. But
yeah.
My father we were going on a trip to Washington D.C. and my father bought me one of those packs. And he's like, here, keep yourself entertained in the car while we're driving to Washington D.C. from Lakeland, Florida.
Right.
You know, and and it did. I just like fell in love, and funny enough, I remember to this day there was a Daredevil issue where Daredevil fights Saber-tooth.
Okay.
And there was a Transformers issue that had the Dinobots on the cover.
Okay.
And I've been recently reorganizing my comics, and I just found that issue of the Transformers. I still have to this day.
It's the one that your dad originally bought you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah. But I never remember what that middle comic was, but to this day, that was sort of my origin story. And then I remember on the trip, we stopped at a 7-Eleven, and if you remember, 7-Elevens carried comics.
Yeah, they did. Yep.
They had like a whole magazine rack.
That's right.
They'd have 10 to 20 comics sometimes just like sitting on their magazine rack.
Yep.
And of course, I'm like addicted to comics in a 2-hour period.
Sure.
And I'm like, Dad, can you get me one of these comics too? And he was like, yeah. And then the funny thing was we were driving when we were in Washington, and then we passed an actual comic book store. So that like whole journey to Washington was like comics were like beating down on my brain. And my dad's like, you want to go in there? And I was like, yeah, let's go in there,
Yeah.
And my dad was a baseball card collector too, so he was always poking around weird places because he was always looking for baseball cards, you know?
No, absolutely. Though I think we should add, for people that are watching, your dad was also a semi-pro baseball player.
Yeah, he played minor league.
Yeah.
Pro.
So we both live in Lakeland, Florida. We had talked about that a little bit. So you go on this trip to DC. You guys stop. You've got comic books on the brain at this point, right? So you have your little grab pack, and then you got some from 7-Eleven. When you get back to Lakeland, what was the Lakeland comic book scene like at that point? Because we've had a lot of retailers in Lakeland.
I don't know. There's this place that used to be in Lakeland called the Fantasy. Well, around that time, as I'm an old man, around that time, uh, Batman 1989 had dropped.
Oh yeah,
You know,
okay, yeah,
so that just like I mean pushed my comic loving to the next extreme.
sure, yeah,
Um, and I remember there's this place in town called the Rib House, and there
sure,
where part of the Rib House is now, there used to be a tiny little baseball card and comic shop that my dad used to go to all the time, and all they had was like old back issues.
sure,
They weren't even like, they were just priced like $1, like $1 box, 50-cent
sure,
box.
yeah, yeah,
But the guy must have had, I don't know, 10 boxes, 10
right,
long boxes.
sure,
So I would go with my dad every time, and of course he would buy me a bunch of comics,
right,
because they were so cheap
right,
too. I mean, even 50 cents and $1 in 1989 is still kind of cheap,
sure,
you
yeah, yeah,
know. Um, I don't know, maybe it's not. I guess new comics were only like 75 cents.
right,
Maybe
right,
they were cheaper than that.
sure,
Maybe they
yeah,
were 25 cents.
right,
And they might have been like 4 for $1.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, probably. Um, but then as my collecting started to grow, I started to read and find out more that there was, new comics and how they came out. And I remember one year too, my mom used to get me stuff from the J.C. Penney's catalog for
Yeah,
Christmas
yeah,
all the
yeah, yeah,
time. And I think one year they had like a deal where you could get like 50 comics, just random comics. Then you didn't even know what it was because she hadn't even opened it yet. And I
sure,
remember it was wrapped, and I opened it, and there were just like Spider-Man, Batman, everything was in
sure,
there.
yeah,
But I remember there were parts of Craven's Last Hunt in that.
a classic,
But and I was reading it, and I was like, but wait, some of it's missing. I
right,
need more of this. And I remember my dad took me to this place in town called the Fantasy Factory,
right,
and dropped me off. And I was just looking at comics,
right.
and
He came back and picked you up, right?
right. He came back and picked me up. But I remember when he came back and picked me up, he was only in the store for maybe 5 minutes. And he's like, come on, we're leaving this place right now. And I was just like, wow, I want to get some comics, man.
Right.
And he was just like, apparently those people behind the counter were like saying something that my dad did not like at all. And I could not remember it to this day. And I've asked him about it.
He doesn't
I don't
remember.
remember what. I was just fascinated by the comics. I
Sure.
give two craps about what those like kids behind the counter were talking
Right,
about,
right.
And he just did not like it, and it took a long time for me to eventually, because it was the best comic shop in town. Like, it was a
Right.
legit comic shop.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They had Dungeons and Dragons. They had everything in there. They had comic book posters. I'd never seen a comic book poster before
Sure.
in my life.
Right. Says the man with
everything.
your own comic book poster behind you.
It took me a long time to talk my dad back into taking me back to that place. At least a year or two.
Right.
And he finally took me back, and I don't know if the different people were working there by that point or whatever, but and from then on, I probably went to the Fantasy Factory at least once a month,
right,
to maybe every 2 weeks,
So did you ever track down the rest of the Craven's Last Hunt?
I mean, I have the trade now.
Fair enough. So you did finally get to read the whole story, right?
Yeah, I mean, I probably had, I don't know if I ever actually owned all the issues, but I do own the trade and have read it to this day.
Good. So something I think you and I end up arguing about comics more times than
we don't. What are you reading right now that
you're a big fan of?
I have been rereading a lot of things lately.
Sure.
I don't know if I told you, but I had put all my comics in the closet, in this outside closet that we have
Yeah.
here at the house,
Yeah.
and they were on the shelf, and the shelf fell down. So like all my I went in there to get my bike out one day, and all my comics were like all over the closet, boxes.
Oh,
It was a
no.
disaster. It was a serious disaster. Um, so I've been gradually, I got it all sort of packed up, but
Sure.
like not in order, you know.
Right.
So I've been gradually on the weekends to keep myself entertained through this global pandemic. I have been reorganizing my comics.
Okay.
That's
always that's a
trap.
trap.
I had mainstream and indie separated,
Right.
but now I'm integrating them all into one. But so I've been going through and getting rid of some stuff and
Right.
reorganizing and going, because some of the comics in there are stuff that I've had since those stories I was telling you about my dad.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Because my dad was a baseball card collector, he sort of imprinted on me to like keep a lot of stuff.
That collector mentality, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I just reread this comic that was one of my biggest influences as a teen, and sort of changed my trajectory from the whole Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee thing.
Right.
And it's this comic by this comic artist named Jason Pearson.
Okay.
He did this book in the 90s. It was like, when Image started, it was like an imprint at first because it was originally under Malibu Comics.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was Image Comics were originally published by Malibu Comics.
Okay.
So originally Image was just an imprint.
Okay.
So at the time, because it was such a huge imprint,
Right.
everybody was doing imprints. So
Right.
Dark Horse, even at that time, had two, and they had what was called Legend, which was Hellboy, Madman, Sin City, Big Guy, and Rusty. And John Byrne was doing this book called The Next Men on there.
Which is where we get Hellboy from.
Right.
Right.
But they also had another imprint that was all these guys from the studio that I loved called Gaijin Studios, which was Brian Stelfreeze, Dave Johnson, Jason Pearson, even Tony Harris was with them for a little bit. And I don't know if the kids out there will recognize any of those guys' names. But Dave Johnson still does a lot of covers even to this day. Stelfreeze occasionally does the thing here and there. But Jason Pearson was my favorite guy out of that whole group. And he did a book called Body Bags through that imprint. And I just reread that. And
hold up.
Oh, man. It's a little un-PC at parts.
Sure.
But it still really holds up. And the artwork is still like, I can still see things that I stole from that guy's work in my work now.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you next is, when you're coming up in the comics, like coming up as a comics fan, like the way you were, who do you think had like the biggest inspiration, the biggest impact on your work that we could see today?
Probably that dude, Jason Pearson.
Okay.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm currently working on a commission right now and the commission that I'm doing is to do a whole page from The Dark Knight Returns.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And like studying this like page that I'm having to like recreate. I think early Miller was a pretty big influence on my work. Frank Miller.
What about like John Kay, the creator of Ren and Stimpy?
Yeah, definitely.
You see,
I think that, but that's like the animation side of my life, and I'm a big animation fan. So yeah, probably John Kay. But the funny thing was when Ren and Stimpy ended, John Kay did this book through Marvel called Comic Book.
Okay.
And it was huge. It was like even bigger than like magazine size.
Oh, so it's like a treasury kind of book.
Yeah. And like I used to look, and I still have a copy of that sitting right on the floor here next to me. I look at it all the time. It's
Sure.
got to be one of my biggest influences, and probably Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1.
Sure.
The very first issue, like I never get tired of that comic. Like I can look at it a million times.
Yeah. No, I mean it's great, right? Like,
Right. And it's a huge, huge influence on my work to this day. And another guy that happened in my teen years, but there's this guy named Dave Cooper who does a lot of weird indie comics.
Sure.
And he has definitely been a huge influence on my work too.
So with you know, this is one of the things that you read about in comics, in the comics media, is that like everybody's kind of pencils down at this point. Are you picking up a lot of commission work and stuff like that to kind of fill the void?
Yeah. I just had somebody email me today about doing a cover for one of their books, and I mean, I don't know. I was in a weird place in the comic book industry. You know, I'm a guy who started off the bat with a sort of weird creator-owned book, and I've done work for Marvel and DC, but sure. I think my fan base and people who like my stuff I'm still sort of at a low level where people feel like they can reach out to me.
Sure.
Low level is a bad word to use. But I think I'm pretty approachable. So, like, you know, I did a cover for a comic that this guy has coming out in Australia, you know? So, you know, it's like, I think people just feel like I'm pretty approachable, and,
sure.
you know, maybe my prices are good enough that, you know, I still get hit up for quite a bit of stuff, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Surprisingly.
So the reason I mentioned, you know, John Kane, like him kind of influencing your work, is because, at least for me, when I look at your books like Bully War, Saber-tooth Swordsman and stuff, your books, the way they flow, your pages flow, it's like reading a cartoon. Like, it's a static cartoon. Like, your characters move in a very animated way. One time you told me, I don't know if you remember this, but if you need a maze, you're the best maze drawer in the business.
I don't know about that.
That was a claim you made.
I'm sure if somebody else attempted to draw a maze, they could do one better than me.
But
I think I might just be one of the very few who has, like, attempted to do that, you know?
Right.
And to be honest, that was really influenced by just, like, Zelda and video games,
sure.
You know?
No, I'm a big fan of Saber-tooth Swordsman. I've heard rumors that there's going to be a follow-up at some point.
Yeah, I'm glacially working on that. You know,
yeah,
but it's happening. I mean, there's a binder with the whole script and thumbnails for every page. You know,
right? Anything you could share about it?
What do you want to know?
Okay. So where we leave off with Saber-tooth, he's defeated the Mastodon mathematician, right? What kind of villains can we expect in Saber-tooth Part 2?
Do you know who Divine is from John Waters movies?
Yes, I know. Yes, I know who Divine is.
Take MODOK and Divine and turn them into one character.
Okay.
And that's the bad guy for the next Saber-tooth book.
So that's who Saber-tooth's squaring off with, is this amalgamation of Divine and MODOK.
Well, she's the one who's kind of running the whole thing.
Okay.
Whether or not he actually squares off with her is...
Okay, we'll leave that for the readers. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What do you have anything else coming up that you'd like to talk about?
I probably shouldn't really talk about it.
Fair.
But the guy that you're going to have on tomorrow, Aubrey, I've actually done a couple pages for a pitch thing that we're going to sort of pitch around. I don't really want to talk about what it is.
No, that's fair.
Like if I lay down the basics of it, somebody else will steal my idea and like make it with me.
No, fair enough. No, absolutely.
Our idea, I should say.
Fair. So besides reorganizing your comics, and I know you said not much has really changed for you since the quarantine and stuff started. What else are you doing to kind of, stay sharp besides doing commissions and stuff like that? I know you said you're kind of glacially working on Saber-tooth. You've got commissions. You're doing some cover work. You just said you did a cover in Australia, but what else is out there?
I'm building a website.
Okay.
Currently, and I'm trying to get together some of the merchandise and things like that that are going to be on that. I think that if one thing that this sort of pandemic has taught me
Sure.
is that I probably shouldn't completely rely on comics for income
Sure.
from now on.
Sure.
It might be a good idea to have some other
Sources.
fires burning
Sure. Yeah. Fair
out
enough.
there, you know.
Yeah.
A little more illustration work, a little more here and there, you know.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's sort of my main goal, is to by the end of the year have a really nice website,
Sure.
and start to sort of um, be a little bit more in touch with my fan base and
Sure.
and things like that. I just recently got a nice thing to like be able to film myself inking, so I did a little inking video on Instagram the
Awesome.
other day. And I did a little talk too, where I was just talking about comics, kind of like we're doing now,
Yeah.
but just with myself, you know. And just try to, you know, market myself a little bit more than just being like, hey, I make comics.
Right.
Hopefully these comics speak for myself,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But I don't know. I had somebody tell me that I've got just as much personality in my life as I got in comics.
Sure.
So I should put that out there a little bit more. And I was like, okay, whatever you say.
Yeah, you can see the personality with your response there.
Right.
So when you you go on this trip to Washington D.C. with your dad. You get back, you find Fantasy Factory. You're a comics guy, right? I'm guessing at this point you probably have a subscription, a sub box. At what point do you go, I'm doing comics. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to draw comics. This is what I'm going to do from here on out.
I mean, I've been drawing my whole life.
Right.
You know, it probably first started off copying things from comics, you know. And then I went to a magnet high school where I was drawing comic booky type things there,
Sure.
even though they didn't really want me to. And I've just been drawing my whole life,
Right.
you know. A few years ago, let's say, I don't know, 2009 or so,
Yeah.
I was like, I think I was always very intimidated by comics.
Sure.
And I never really thought that I could do it.
Right.
Really.
Right.
Or didn't know how to
Right.
start doing it.
Sure.
And I was, you know, doing a lot of other things. I was a hairdresser for a while.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of other things, and I think that it finally hit me in about 2009. And I was following a lot of blogs at the time.
Sure.
Of like guys who were like talking about what they were doing and how they were doing it, and just Brendan Graham was like just so pumped about comics on his blog
Sure.
at that time, and it was getting me pumped about comics.
Right.
And I had started working actually back for Coliseum sometime around then,
Sure.
you know, and I was just really excited about comics again.
Right.
And I was like, man, I have got to do this if I'm going to do it.
Sure.
I got to do it now. I got to stop screwing around, and I just have to just do it. And my Damon at the time was sort of feeling the same way. He's about the same age as me, and he had been making music and little videos, and
Right.
he was just really just an inspired dude at the time. You know, he was down to do anything, and he's a great artist himself, you
Right.
know. And he was, like I said, just really easy to work with and really fun to work with.
Right.
And we would get together and have some beers and just like talk about all the stuff we wanted to do.
Right.
And we were just like, let's just do this, you know? And we started a website called Invade My Privacy at the time. And we were posting all kinds of things on there.
Right.
We were doing a little vampire comic that was very like Max Fleischer influenced,
Sure.
you know, very Betty Boop sort of a thing. And I was kind of starting the seeds of Saber-tooth at the time.
Okay.
And then, you know, Dark Horse reached out to us and wanted to know if we wanted to do something for their MySpace Presents.
Right.
Because we had sent out, we had actually sent out like a package to them. Damon had.
Okay.
And people, even at that time, people weren't really doing that anymore.
Right.
You know, that they actually got like a package of pages in the mail.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that stuff lying around, you know?
Right.
It's all on the computer now. But so they had reached out to us, and did I get off track of what your question was?
No, you're doing well. This is great, man.
But they had reached out to us about doing something for their Dark Horse MySpace Presents.
Right.
We did something through them, and through them we got hooked up with an assistant editor.
Sure.
And the assistant editor was trying to bring some projects in, I think, to like move up in a little bit in Dark Horse,
right.
You know, and we were trying to make comics, you
right.
know, and we just lucked out. And Brendan worked with us for about a year on just getting the pitch like just right.
That's
you
your
know?
editor at the time.
Huh?
Brendan's your editor at the time?
Yeah, Brendan Wright is our editor. And he worked with us for about a year on the pitch just to make sure that it was like commercially viable.
Right.
Right? Which is still not to this day, but to make it sound like it was commercially viable.
Sure.
I don't know. They could make a great Saber-tooth Swordsman animated series, I think. But that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so we worked on that for about a year. We had some sample pages. And then they, you know, they have a financial meeting or a business meeting, you know, where they pitch stuff at Dark Horse. And they pitched it, and the guy was like, I think Brendan told me that the money man at Dark Horse was like, all right, project through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that was like your first big shot at it, and they're like, yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was out with a friend like a week before, and I was like, the scariest thing is if this project actually goes through, because then I have to draw it.
Right. Then you have to. So actually, that leads me to my next question. We have a question from one of the people watching right now. Aaron, do you get stir crazy working at home? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
I don't.
You don't get stir crazy ever?
No. I love it here. I think that I have my little art room set up nicely enough, you know.
Sure.
I just don't get. I step into this art room, and you know, like Katrina has to tell me to leave a lot of days.
Really?
You know?
Just chase you out
like
of the
you're
office?
done.
Right.
Be done.
Right.
You know, I just don't. I think maybe some of that is guilt, though. I feel maybe like for the years that I didn't work harder
Sure.
trying to be an artist,
Right.
You know, so I feel like I have a lot to make up for.
Right.
But at the same time, I keep myself pretty entertained. You know, I'm either in here listening to like really good podcasts
Who's
or
your
an
favorite
audio book.
Who's your favorite podcaster?
Or, you know, I just try to keep myself entertained. And this guy is like sleeping next to me every day. And
Sure.
I just have a really comfortable little space back here. And, you know, I'd rather be working on my own projects than spending time on somebody else's project.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Right. So it's like, for you, it's more
Don't
fun.
get me wrong. I love movies and video games and art
Sure.
of all kinds.
Right.
But I try to limit my intake of a lot of that stuff because it makes me feel guilty, like I said, for not working on my own things.
Right.
You
And
know?
As somebody that's been in your art room, like I could probably spend a whole day in there just playing with your TMNT action figure collection, or going through comics, or even like old pages, like your scrap pages that you keep in there. Yeah, I totally understand and see why you're so comfortable in there. So I'm supposed to ask about your hat. Everybody's really interested in your Davy Crockett hat, and I see you've got the Bully Wars eyeball there.
What do they want to know about it?
I think they're fans of it.
It's my trademark. It's my new trademark.
Is the Davy Crockett hat?
Yeah, it's covering up my baldness.
So let me ask you this: your baldness?
It's not really. Don't really let people believe that I'm bald.
No, you're not. I actually saw a very nice picture of you recently where you had some French braids going. It was great.
Yeah, right.
So I've got a good question for you. Of all the other writers or artists that you've worked with, whose process is the most different from yours, and how did you make that work? Because I mean, you've worked with a pretty impressive stable. I mean, you worked with Scotty Young last year. You and Damon, you and Aubrey. I know you worked with some guys at DC and Marvel.
I don't think I've worked with anybody that their process was that different.
Really? You guys have always kind of just gelled and mixed real well? Like a gin and soda?
No. I mean, the thing is that, like, it's like I said earlier with, like, Damon and those guys and Aubrey, it's like those guys are the best. Hopefully the guys like that are, like, the future of comics, because they are open to just about anything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're down to, like, they're just pumped. Like, Aubrey, that dude is just still pumped about comics.
Right. Right.
Like, he doesn't even have to work in comics, but
Sure.
He's just pumped about it. And it's very inspiring to see.
Sure.
And those guys are guys that I've chosen to work with. So it's a lot of fun to work with them.
Right.
Know?
Yeah.
Now, when you're doing just a regular gig, like when you get an email from an editor and they're like, "Hey, are you open up for this gig?"
Sure.
Then you just get a script in the mail.
Sure.
And in the email, and the script, has it written.
Right.
But very rarely has there ever been a point when I've drawn a comic that when people start getting pages in, that they're like, "Oh, you need to change that."
They're usually very happy pretty early on.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only change that I could ever recall making was when I was working. When I did that Rocket and Groot issue at Marvel. Marvel just asked me to make the Wasps. There was a shot of the Avengers, like, out of the Avengers table.
Yeah. Because aren't they playing D&D?
What? Yeah. But I had drawn the Wasp with, like, a bob, and I think at the time she had just, like, a little short pixie cut or something.
Right.
You know? And so Marvel's just like, "Hey, can you make sure that she has a pixie cut?"
Right.
So
you had to go back
just
and kind of,
like, be in continuity,
So.
But yeah, like, nobody's ever, and I've never. I mean, most people work at the pretty basic script level these days.
Right.
Which is, the shots are like, "Hey, panel 1, the character's in a bar."
Right.
Panel 2, a glass gets chucked across the bar.
Right.
Panel 3, nobody's like working like Alan Moore these days.
Right.
Nobody's like, there's 3 kinds of beer sitting on the bar,
Right.
Heineken,
Right.
Guinness. Nobody is that detailed in comics. And I would like to say that most of the writers that I work with have hopefully been happy. I mean, I've worked with a lot of guys again,
Right.
hopefully been happy with what I did, what they gave me.
Now, when you get those scripts in, and they are just kind of broad brush, like a bottle gets chucked across the room or whatever, versus like you used Alan Moore as an example where it's very detailed. There's 3 types of scotch or beer or whatever. Which do you prefer to draw from? Do you like those more detailed scripts, or do you like those broad strokes where you can kind of create your own thing?
Broad strokes all day long.
Right, so you can kind of fill in the gaps.
I'm the kind of guy that I want to make up my own beer.
Right.
For the comic, and hopefully that beer is going to be in reference to my dog or
right.
Something that's happening in my life, maybe something I'm really into at the moment, So, like I said, maybe it'll be like, and that's influence from Jason Pearson as well. I remember back in the day when he did a Savage Dragon miniseries.
Sure.
He drew the characters in a bar, and the
right.
bar was called Hard Boiled.
Right.
And the guy behind the counter looked like John Woo. So,
okay, very cool. Yeah.
So I think a lot of, and Jeff Darrow, I didn't mention Jeff Darrow's a huge influence.
Sure.
And like I like things open, so then I can just go buck wild with like my little nods. Right. I did the issue of TMNT that I actually drew was a real car heavy issue.
Sure.
And it's funny because I don't think I'm very good at drawing cars, and I didn't really want to draw cars. But at the time, I wasn't going to turn down drawing
an issue of TMNT, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it didn't even have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in it. It had, Man Ray and some like cyber wolf characters.
These ancillary
and
characters,
that, like,
right?
Tiger or the like lion lady that's in the books right now.
Yep.
But like I said, I mean, it was still, it was still the TMNT, and I got to like redesign this old character called Dreadmon.
Sure.
For them, and it's just not a thing you're going to turn down. And if I would have had my way, I wouldn't have made it a car issue.
Sure. Right.
It's good to learn, and it's good to have that challenge.
Right.
But like, no, I've never really worked with anybody who was really like, and if they say, it might have said like, I think in that issue it said like the car that they were driving was like a Charger.
Sure.
But he was like maybe like a 69 Charger.
Sure.
But I actually like the 79 Charger better, so
right.
I drew a 79 Charger in the book.
And that was okay.
Yeah, nobody said anything to me,
So we actually have a few more questions. First, oh hi Mark. Second, they want to know what podcast are you listening to while you're in there working?
Ooh.
Ding.
The sad thing that everybody will be to hear is that I listen to no comics podcasts.
Oh wow. Okay. What is your
I don't
favorite
listen
podcast?
to any talk about comics while I'm in here. Nothing. I get enough of that in my life every day.
Right.
I mean, probably like your basics, like this. I always listen to This American Life.
Sure.
I always listen to Radio Lab.
Right.
I'm pretty into this podcast called Disgraceland right now, which is a guy who does these episodes about like all the horrible things that like rock stars have done throughout the years.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great. The guy's good. It's called Disgraceland. What are some of my other favorites? There's this one podcast I listen to that's called like The Secret History of Hollywood.
Uh-huh.
And like some of his podcasts will be like 4 hours long.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Oh, I think we might have lost Aaron there for a moment. Let's see if he comes back. Oh, it looks like we have a little bit of technical difficulty on Aaron's side. Let's see what's going on here. Aaron, can you still hear me? All right, guys, I'm sorry about that. It looks like we may have lost Aaron, but thanks for joining us for another episode of Coliseum Forum. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time with Aubrey Sitterson, who's drawing G.I. Joe. No One Left to Fight. The comic books, History of Professional Wrestling. I'm sorry if I said he drew those. He wrote those comics. So We will be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. And again, guys, thanks for joining us for Coliseum Forum.